Good afternoon, my friends. I want to talk about training zone for a minute here. It's been a big theme recently in my work, and we're going to go over a couple different things with training zone. So, number one, I want to tell you a couple of things that are guaranteed to put you outside your training zone. And the first one is if you double the amount you're doing in a day, generally speaking, that might be enough by itself to put you out of your training zone, especially when you're in a stage where you're just beginning that training. You're in like a proper, you're training on something like walking or food or standing or exposing yourself to something that's been a trigger in the past. And if you increase the intensity or the length of time or the amount of thing you're consuming, if you're eating something by, like if you double it in one day, that's often enough to put you outside your training zone. If you increase it by about 1.5 and do that a couple days in a row, that's likely to also land you quite outside your training zone. And what does that mean? What does it mean to be outside your training zone? So my definition for that in the process of limbic rewiring is that you're in a position where no matter how hard you try, no matter how much effort you put in, you cannot get out of a trauma loop. So you're lost in these, fear loops and obsessive thought patterns, and symptoms are really intense, and it's really hard to get your attention away from them and to get any sense of calm or reality outside of all of that activity that's just going on pretty much 24/7 or just all the time. So if you cannot get back to a healthy neural pathway, no matter how much effort you put in, you're outside your training zone. And I want to highlight too that this is a necessary part of recovery. It's innately trial and error. Trial and error is such a big thing in recovery, and it's okay to be outside your training zone. It's safe, it's okay, you didn't mess up. Nobody knows where their training zone is, like where the line is of how much they can handle when they're beginning. And often I will see folks do this, and of course I did too, step outside our training zone because we're feeling better. And I want to highlight that just because we're feeling good doesn't mean the brain can adapt to change at a faster rate. Training zones are all about how quickly the brain is able to adapt and how much we're able to stay in those new pathways of joy and calm and seeing whatever we're doing as safe. That's something we need to build and be able to stay in that instead of going into the old trauma loop of associating whatever it is with threat and feeling unsafe with it and symptom. So that's something the rate at which your brain can adapt doesn't change. So even if you're feeling good and you want to do more, your brain's not going to be able to make that leap. So how you feel has nothing to do with how much you're training, like how much incremental training you're doing and how much you can increase by. Now, if you find yourself outside your training zone, I just want to give you a couple of tips to get back in it. The first one is don't beat yourself up and know that you're okay and know what's going on. I see a lot of folks who aren't familiar with this and are very surprised when their brain is not responding to their tools the way it normally does. It's very, very common that, whatever practice you're doing, whatever program you're using, your brain is it's gonna feel like no matter what you do, your brain doesn't respond at all. And that can feel really scary if we don't understand why. So know that if you're outside your training zone, that's part of it. Your limbic system's not gonna respond in its usual fashion to your tools. Two more things a couple things here. So there's two big pops that tend to come up when we're outside the training zone. One is, I've lost all my progress. That's the one I hear out the gate with almost every single client in this is, oh my goodness, did I lose all my progress? Or, oh my goodness, I feel like I think I lost all my progress. You cannot lose progress. You have built an entire new city of new healthy neural networks. Imagine it like, houses and roads and all of that. You've paved all of that. You've created all of that. When you're outside your training zone, your limbic system hijacks, right? And it plops you into Limbiland, where it's just crazy limbic chaos. But everything you built is still there, and it cannot disappear overnight. It's not possible. That's literally impossible. That stuff is still there, and as long as you're still making an effort to get back to calm, to get back to a healthy neural pathway, it's succeeding. You're getting there. So you can't lose progress. That's impossible. You didn't lose it. You may feel like you are, where you were when you started your journey. You may feel very activated and very uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean you lost your progress. It's just a state. It's a temporary state you're in. The other thing that can come up with this is that our limbic systems will often use this as a way to say, hey, look, see, I was right. This doesn't work, and that thing is actually dangerous. And that's also not true. It's just we increased the amount of it faster than we were able to adapt. Faster than, we were able to have the strength to stay in those new pathways when the limbic pull is to go back to the old patterns in relative to whatever it is you're training on. So know that the thing is not a threat. boomerang does work. It just does require that we are incremental and very slowly, very carefully incremental with our exposure to things that have been a trigger. It's really important. So if you find yourself in that position, there's a few tips. In order to get back in your training zone, I encourage you to step back from incremental training for about a week to 2 weeks and just focus on continuing to do the rest of your practice. Visualize, elevate your mood, whatever you're doing. Use somatics, calming things. Just stay on the ball of that. And a lot of times as we start to come back into the training zone, it's wobbly. You might have days where you're like, okay, I'm feeling a bit more like I was where before I stepped out of my training zone. And you might have days where you're like, this is still pretty hairy. That's normal. It's going to wobble a little bit. And if you're consistent, you're likely to get back to where you were in a couple of weeks to a month, depending on how long you were outside your training zone for before you turned the ship around. But it doesn't take that long. Comparatively, you're not going to have to do everything over again. You don't have to rebuild that city from scratch. It's just a matter of making the trek back there, which again can take a few weeks. And then once you're ready, start your incremental training wherever you were. I encourage you to start at half of your old normal level. So if you've been, just training on walking, let's say, and you were doing a mile a day, and then you exited your training zone, start back at a half a mile for a couple days, and then 3/4, and then a mile, and just kind of give yourself a chance to go up those steps slowly, but you don't need to start from scratch in order to get back in your training zone. Love you guys.